Australia. It's so nice to be with you again today. I mean, this time, second time round. And I'm very excited to do this demo class with all of you because it really gets to the heart of the whole process. Um, and so a demo class is going to be a little different because they're not going to be with children, but they're going to be with all of you listening. But I will show the process. I did this process, with adults like this in for the Vrindavan Gurukul teachers, and it works. So I thought, why not? It just makes it more simple. It's too early in the morning for some children, so I thought, well, let me try this way. So I thought, since many of you in Melbourne have the Srimad Bhagavatam guidebooks that collectively many parents put together, as you're aware. So I decided to do the first canto, chapter 1, with all of you, and then we can go briefly over the guidebook for this chapter. Okay, and let's see how much time it takes, and then accordingly we'll plan to do another story, or we'll just leave it at this. And we will, after I do this, then I would like to open it up for questions in case there was any confusion or anything you want to clarify with me. I'd be happy. Now, this process is going to be very similar to different age groups. Now, obviously, for the really younger children, it's going to be different, and for that, I had an audio in the last seminar where you got a very good idea about sharing, studying Bhagavatam with the very young ones, which was like between 3 and 5. And then the process for, children who are between 6 and 9, like that. It's also going to be the same process pretty much. And also for children older than 9, the type of questions we're going to ask is just going to be a little simpler according to the age group. And then it can be deeper for the older kids. So what I'm going to give you today is a demonstration of how you would do it with the older kids, so that you have a good idea how deep we can go, and then you can always make it simpler for the younger children. That's easy to do. But so I would like to show you what is really the limit we can go with our children, and I will also give you examples of how you can make it simpler for younger children. And so I'll begin now. And before we begin, if all of you can repeat after me in the invocation. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we can do that with our children, so they can understand that this is something very transcendental, and it really kind of gets them into the mood of doing Bhagavatam after we say this. So generally what I do is as the teacher, I read the Sanskrit for the first verse. And in this case, I won't, because it's a very big one. And then nobody else does the Sanskrit, okay? We all take turns reading the translation, okay? Now, in this chapter, the first translation is very big. So ahead of time, I tell, I call out the names. I have a list next to me. If it's a group class, I have a list next to me. And I tell them that, okay, these 3 children can share this translation. So they are alert. They, ahead of the time, ahead of reading, they know, okay, they have to share this translation. And I even help them out by, if they are younger children, I even help them by telling them, okay, that's good. And then the next child picks up from there. So it goes very smoothly. There's no confusion. You've already told 3 children that you're going to you're going to share this translation, and it goes really rather smoothly. And then you even tell them where to stop, and they're happy to stop, and they give the turn to the next child. So this way, when we're reading the translation, there's no confusion. It's very clear, and then we go into the discussion. Now, in terms of discussion, we have this, purports, by Prabhupada. Now, there's 2 scenarios here for parents who haven't had a chance before the class to read the purports. And also it could be, for some, they may have a very busy schedule. I want to let you know that you can do even without reading the purports with them, and you can have a very good class. Because as parents, we have enough experience. However, if you can read at least some purpose ahead of time, or all of the purpose ahead of time, it will be naturally a very more effective, because we feel more confident, especially in a chapter like this, which is so philosophical. It's nice to have some idea ahead of time. So if you can do something, it'll be great. Otherwise, believe me, it'll still work. Because like I told you, when I was teaching Bhagavatam to my children, I actually hadn't read Bhagavatam before, and yet it worked. Obviously, something worked because they got a lot out of it. The results were there. And like I already spoke to you in the last seminar. Right? So please, don't lose hope in terms of time factor. Just get into it, and the results, because Srimad Bhagavatam is so powerful, is so potent. Any effort in this regard of sharing this knowledge with our children is going to have immense benefit, and you will see the results quite quickly. So now, the reason why I picked this one especially is because, this is a very philosophical chapter. And so if we can do this with our children, we know that we can do a beautiful story, like, we can do a nice story. That won't be an issue. That won't be a problem. Okay. So what I'm going to do, is I'm going to read the translation for you. And so please follow the book. I'm hoping that all of you parents have the book in front of you, or, so you can read that. Okay. And with me, at least follow it, and then we will do the discussion. Dharna, there is somebody who's got the video on. Can you ask her to shut it off, because there's a lot going in there? It's Meenakshi Mishra. Thank you. Thank you. It's a little distracting because it's moving constantly. Okay. So yeah, so let me read this, and then we'll discuss. I'll show you how. Now, as you know, this first verse is very important, and Prabhupada, spoke on it at length, and also I heard, I'm not sure, but Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati spoke several months on just this one verse. And he said that this one verse, one can speak, or of course the acharyas can speak for a long, long time, because it really is the heart. It kind of sums up the entire Bhagavatam in this verse. So we'll spend some extra time on this. However, I want to share that even though, as adults, we need to spend a lot of time in this verse, but for children, we have to be, selective, because when we see them getting a little fidgety or they can't handle it, then we move on. We shouldn't hesitate. We shouldn't hesitate in doing that. So we have to use our common sense like that. Okay, so this is the translation of the first verse. O my Lord, Sri Krishna, son of Vasudeva, O all-pervading personality of Godhead, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. I meditate upon Lord Shri Krishna because he is the absolute truth and the primeval cause of all causes, of the creation, sustenance, and destruction of the manifested universes. He is directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations, and he is independent because there's no other cause beyond him. It is he only who first imparted the Vedic knowledge unto the heart of Brahmaji, the original living being. By him, even the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion, as one is bewildered by the illusory representations of water seen in fire or land seen on water. Only because of him do the material universes, temporarily manifested by the reactions of the three modes of nature, appear factual, although they are unreal. I therefore meditate upon him, Lord Shri Krishna, who is eternally existent in the transcendental abode, which is forever free from the illusory representations of the material world. I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute truth. So a lot of wonderful points. Now we have to see what would be something simple for the children. Like there's a lot of philosophy here and a lot of different things. So okay, so what catches our eye is that Krishna is the cause of all causes, right? So that's something we know that it means that he's the ultimate cause, right? So I was thinking that we could just trace it out like that, a simple question like, okay, so you are here today, and so who is the cause for you being here, now obviously they're going to say parents, and then so who is the cause of your parents? In other words, how did they come into this world? And they're going to say, well, my grandparents, like that. And so in this way we can explain to them how if you were to trace out the whole the family tree, ultimately we have to come to Krishna. That is absolutely. In other words, why? Because we'll come to the entire Brahmaji, and then of course Krishna. In this way they can get a good idea. Okay, Krishna is the cause of all, and they have a lot of fun doing this because all the children like to know, they like to relate themselves to their parents and grandparents. I've done it with them, and they really like that. They like to discuss that, right, and to figure that out. And of course, for younger children, you can, make visual things. We'll talk about that later. And then he's the cause of creation, sustenance, and destruction. You can say, okay, what does sustenance mean? You explain that, and that's maintenance and destruction. So when we talk about creation, then we can talk about the Bhagavatam perspective of creation, because every child loves that part where Mahavishnu is lying on the ocean and all these universes are coming out from his pores, right? And that's is very fascinating. So we can say how he's creating all these things. And for older children, you can get into more details. For example, Mahavishnu further expands and into Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, and he enters into every universe, and then of course he expands into every living entity like that. So so actually what happens is when we read the purport, if we read the purport, then we understand that Prabhupada is mentioning one point very strongly, and that is, how the creation, according to Srimad Bhagavatam, is so personal versus the creation as explained by the scientists or modern scientists, right? And so that leads us into something which can be debated, right? So we can say that so this is, devotees know that Mahavishnu is the cause of creation, but what do the scientists say? What do your science books say, right? Some may know, some may not know. If they don't know, it's okay. You can explain to them. And then you can explain maybe one theory from that. Prabhupada, of course, refutes many theories, right? The Big Bang and this is or the evolution theory, Darwin's or evolution theory. And if you know something about that, then you can and children love that. I mean, if you even give them a basic understanding of Darwin's philosophy that we all came from apes and things, then they're very fascinated, and then you give the devotional perspective, and you kind of debate it out, why we cannot come from monkeys, right? From lower animals, right? So then they'll come up with all kinds of different things, that um, you know. Because we can question them that why do you think Darwin's theory is not correct, right? And they'll come up with some very nice things. Even a 9-year-old child can really, can answer these questions, basic questions, because they'll say, well, things like, well, if we were coming from monkeys, there's one theory that why aren't they around now? Or, and if they may not know the answer that Prabhupada sometimes gives is that lower, higher intelligence cannot come from lower intelligence, but it's vice versa. In other words, it goes in a descending order. In other words, Brahma can only create the lower species. And of course, Brahma gets it, ultimately Krishna is the one who's creating everything, right? So for the older kids, you go deeper and you say, well, this is what Prabhupada explains. And you'll get it from that pulpit. Prabhupada's pulpits have all these answers, right? So you can go deeper for them and actually refute it out. You can refute out Darwin's theory, according to him, ultimately we all came from microbes, from the very, very tiny species, and then gradually it developed into humans, from monkeys and all that. So all these things can be kind of, really thrashed out with even as old as starting from 9-year-old, 10-year-old, to all the way to 17, 18, like that. So depending on our knowledge about it, or depending on the children, the age group, we can just go deeper and make it fun for them. Once they get hooked on debating and playing devil's advocate, they love it. They love it. And the younger kids want to keep getting that chance to want to, debate, because they think it's so much fun. And the other thing is that they get a chance to speak. And all children love to speak, to give their opinion. So communication skills are being taken care of. And also, they feel very proud to be a devotee, because they feel, wow, as a devotee, we defeated the other side, right? They feel proud, they feel very successful. And in this way, their faith in the Vedic conclusions increases. They may not understand everything, but that's okay. Just the act of trying it out and doing it builds that identity as a devotee, builds that faith that here, okay, the whole world may be saying something else, but I know this is what it is like, right? So this can be pretty much used for this type of debating, can be used for any subject matter which has the two sides, right? So in this way, uh, creation can be discussed, where we bring in other creation theories of other people out there, right? And then sustenance is maintenance. So we explained what it is. And then if you think of something, even without reading the purport, you can discuss that. For example, how Krishna is maintaining everybody. Prabhupada says that he's maintaining an elephant who's eating tons of food, and he's also maintaining a little ant. So ultimately, Krishna is the one who's giving food to everyone, giving sustenance to everyone. Um, he's providing that as a very kind father. He, it's not the government who's providing everything. It is Krishna, because who goes hungry? I mean, there's billions of living entities, lower species, but nobody goes hungry. Krishna has provided so much food, so much food, so much. He's taking care of everybody that we don't have to worry, right? So that again is a nice point which can be discussed with all age groups. How Krishna ultimately is taking care of us, right? There's, you know, yeah, and it's not, and how people may profess that they are taking care, we may think, people may think, oh, because I have a good government, they are taking care. Obviously, they become instruments, and yes, but ultimately it's Krishna who's providing everything. Okay, in this way, we can go through all three: creation, sustenance, and destruction, and how Krishna destroys, how he does it so perfectly. So if you've read, I'm sure you've read about, Krishna ultimately destroying and how everything is completely destroyed. There's so many things. I mean, just your experience in life can create discussion. But for children, it's so wonderful because, like destruction, one can talk about Krishna's destruction, which is so perfect at the end of all the yugas, at the end of Brahma's life, and how people want to when they destroy is meant, just simply is not perfect. They end up destroying something, but it cannot completely destroy, because that's up to Krishna. In other words, the function of destruction belongs to Krishna also, because he can do everything so perfectly. So in this way, you can think of anything, anything that comes to your mind, in terms of destruction, which will bring home the point to children, is the supremacy of Krishna, and it brings home the point, the supremacy of the Vedic literatures. You've done your job, okay. But of course, it has to be, coherent. It has to make sense. It shouldn't be like sentimental, or it should be based on rationality. So all these, so that the children can use their logic and reasoning as to why this is like that. And for younger children, you can always make it better, and I mean, like, more fun, by speaking like that, by creating a picture to make that, to give that point across, in destruction, on the or any of these points, and being a teacher or a parent, you can think of something which to make it more visual for them, or just more interesting for them. But the concepts are, the idea is the same. In other words, we're trying to give them this knowledge, this that Krishna is the one. He's the owner, he's the creator, he's everything. And how we present it to them will depend on the age group, and the mental makeup of the children. Okay, so in this way, the other point that uh, really strikes us is how, because how Krishna puts, as you can see here. Of course, there's another point here: independent. Again, Krishna is independent. Now, what does that mean? Obviously, if he's the original cause, then Krishna is independent. He's not dependent on some other cause for his existence, right? And you can put this in simpler language, for the children. So, in other words, somebody can be independent only if there's nothing, no cause for his existence, right? He's completely independent, like that. Or you can think of something else, and to show that Krishna doesn't really need anything, right? Of course, that's, and you can even skip that point if you feel like children is too much, if the children is not necessary, or you don't feel inspired to invest, you to try to figure this out. It's okay. It's okay. We can move. There's so many points, and then, of course, the next point is that how he's putting everybody in illusion, but he never comes under illusion. And this is really a fun part of this verse. I remember asking the children if they know, and any time you want to bring it to a story level, it really gets home the point of that philosophy, of that philosophical part, is when we give examples, when we ask them to give examples from stories in the Srimad Bhagavatam. They really like to exercise their brain for that, because then they feel, wow, it kind of re-emphasizes that point that they know so much. They have a grasp over Srimad Bhagavatam, and they feel successful and victorious, right? So then you ask for them an example. When Brahma is, when one of the times when somebody, when Krishna puts that personality under illusion. And of course, Brahma is a very good example. The Brahma, when he stole the cows and the children and the cowherd boys. That's such a wonderful example. And among the children, somebody will know that answer, guaranteed, right? So he's putting Brahma in illusion, thinking that, oh, this is an ordinary boy, and then you tell that story. The child gets that opportunity to give that story, which makes it, and children, of course, move into an interesting area, right? And and if you want to do it with older kids, you say, well, is Krishna under the illusion? So a lot this process is also going to be in the form of questions. So in other words, instead of just monologue, okay, I'm going to give a whole class on this one verse. No, we don't do it like that. Constant questioning. If the children don't know much about the subject matter, then obviously the one thing that is going to make it interesting is questioning. What do you think? How Krishna creates. Let them say it. How do you think Krishna maintains it? Like that, whatever you feel best. You can put it in the form of questions because that gets them going. They start thinking. As soon as you put a question to them, then they start thinking, right? And without making them, cornering them and making them feel, or if it's a group, some child may be more more able to answer questions, and some children and another child may feel like he doesn't know much. So we have to be very careful, especially in group classes, how to encourage every child and how to never let even one child feel that he doesn't know enough, how everybody else is better. Because you will have to find opportunities where the child who's behind in knowing many things gets an opportunity to speak out and give her or his opinion in some other area. So immediately you find something which is really simple, and you can ask that child, oh, what do you think about this? And the child will get a turn, an opportunity to answer, and that will really build up the self-confidence. And it also prevents other children who know the answer from feeling great superiority, like, wow, feeling proud or giving that feeling that I know so much and somebody else doesn't know so much, than like me. So we have to be to keep the group dynamics going. And you would do that same thing with your own children at home. Same thing. I'm discussing a group situation, but that same process is used for your own children. Not to make one feel like, oh, I'm not so good. Of course, there could be an age gap, right? And obviously, the younger ones, they're totally okay with knowing less, right? Because they know they're very little. I'm talking about in terms of equality, where there's one child who knows a lot and all. So we have to be very careful about that and not let even one child miss out on enjoying, on appreciating Srimad Bhagavatam. That's very important. Otherwise, we'll find ourselves just focusing on a couple children in the class because they know all the answers. No. And I also become a little bit like, I openly tell the children who know a lot and seems like they're ahead, maybe they're older or whatever, that, okay, well, before I know that they're going to answer the most, so I'll say, okay, well, I want to hear from somebody who hasn't spoken before. That helps, that technique helps, but also I will take the name of the child who's not speaking so much. Right. And then I would put that question, not a difficult question by which he becomes too defensive, but rather a simpler version. And I will encourage that child. Wow, that was such a nice answer. Many times it may not be a very good answer, but our attitude as a teacher should be very, very positive. And especially encouraging those who are behind, not only in terms of comprehension or language or anything, but also who are behind because they haven't read Shastra before or something, and these concepts are new to them. So that's a very important point, that we need to be always positive, always encouraging, always bright and happy, and make it a pleasant experience for them and make it really fun. So even a topic like this, we can use all these principles and make it really fun for them, right? So in this way, we talk about how Brahma is an illusion. And then other children will give other examples, right? They could, uh, they will probably be able to give another example because they're thinking really, really hard, right? Thinking really, really hard about this. And so they'll come up with many examples and we can discuss those. We can talk about those examples, or we can just summarize those other examples. We don't have to go into every story that where Krishna is putting them in illusion. And yeah. And then, of course, another example is Mother Yashoda and all the Brajavasis. And, see, you see how one thing will lead into another thing. One point will lead into another point. Okay. Now, when we're talking about the Brajavasis, then so many more points can come in, right? So the wonderful thing about Bhagavatam is it's going to lead from one thing to another. There's no end to it. But if we wait too long on one verse, chances are that the children will get a little fidgety, right? So we need to move on. So we know, we get that feeling, we know that, okay, it's time to move on, right? So, yeah. You can talk about why they are put the reason why Krishna puts them in an illusion, because they want to have this natural love for Krishna, where they're thinking, oh, Krishna is my friend. I'm going to play with him. Or Mother Yashoda is thinking, he's my little child. And for the older kids, then you can explain how, if Krishna if they did not have this kind of relationship with Krishna, it's going to be very unnatural, very different, rather, where where they cannot see Krishna as their own self, as their own friend. So in this way, we can go deeper and like that. Now I'm giving you a scenario where this is going really, really deep, right? But you can make it as little as you want. And this way, we covered the first verse, and we're ready to move on, right? And again, we don't have to cover all the points, and yeah, and then we move on. Okay, and of course, Krishna Prabhupada discusses many other points, but this is good enough, right? So we move on to the next verse. Okay, I'm going to read the translation here. And there may be verses where you don't want to speak at all. Maybe you don't know enough or it's too difficult for the children. That's okay. That's okay. Completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated, this Bhagavad Puran propounds the highest truth, which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart. The highest truth is reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. Such truth uproots the threefold mysteries. This beautiful Bhagavatam, compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity, is sufficient in itself for God realization. What is the need of any other scripture? As soon as one attentively, submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam, by this culture of knowledge, the Supreme Lord is established within the heart. Yeah. So, so this is a very, very high philosophy, and we can try to find something in the purport which they can relate to and just make a simple point or to have a little discussion on that point. In other words, sometimes we cannot find a discussion point in the translation, but Prabhupada will have something in the purport which kind of brings home this point here that is being made here. Okay. And sometimes, no, you may want to go on and not discuss this, right? So in this way, we can think of something. I was thinking of how to talk about materialism. That creates all types of problems. It creates, pride and envy, because Prabhupada does talk about competition in human society. So we can take that one point and talk about envy or competition among people, and how that envy leads to so much misery and things like that. Okay. Otherwise, we'll move on. Let's move on. Okay. Okay. O expert and thoughtful men, relish Srimad Bhagavatam, the mature fruit of the desire tree of Vedic literatures. In the lips of Shukadeva Goswami. Therefore, this fruit has become even more tasteful, although its nectarian juice was already relishable for all, including liberated souls. So this is a really fun verse for them because we're talking about, how Srimad Bhagavatam is the ripened fruit of the Vedic tree. So we can have them imagine, or if you have a piece of paper, you can even make quickly a drawing of the Vedic tree, of a tree with mangoes, and a very, very ripe mango on top. And that's Srimad Bhagavatam. Because the tree, the most ripe one, which is the most sweetest and the best, they are, it happens to be on the top. And of course, the Vedic tree also includes, if you read the purport right on that page, we hear about how the Vedic tree includes every knowledge, all kinds of mundane or mystical knowledge. Everything is there. So again, we can, discuss that, how Vedas really is the origin of all knowledge. There's whatever knowledge there is in the world is in the Vedas. But why is Srimad Bhagavatam the best? And then we talk about, so many things like, because obviously it's because the best. And that will, and the reason is because it's so pure, right? And then we can talk about, according to the purport, there's some discussion on disciplic succession, how when we need that fruit, what is the best way to get that fruit? If we just break it, if we just allow it to come down, it's going to smash because it's so juicy and ripe, right? So we need to hand it down from person to person. In other words, it has to be carefully taken down, and that means the disciplic succession, right? And you can discuss that concept, how knowledge has to come down from Krishna to Brahma, like that, and Narad Muni. And so we talk about that, and so it becomes very visual for them. Wow, this is this mature, sweet fruit, and the only way to bring it down is through people sitting on different branches and handing it over to them. So that's the point. Then, of course, the point of Shukadev Goswami is and all this can be seen in the translation, how Shukadev Goswami was when he, when he pecks on this mango, then it becomes sweeter. So what it means, again, is a comparison, is an analogy type thing. And this is really, really good for them. How Shukadev Goswami is a parrot and he's pecking on the parrot. And what it means is that he's speaking the Bhagavatam. So when it comes from his lips, which is like the parrot pecking on so they're drawing a comparison. Okay, Shukadeva Goswami is a parrot, he's pecking on it, which means that he's speaking this knowledge. And they get, they learn how to think like that. They learn how to do abstract thinking, which is so very good for them. Because from this abstract thinking there's going to come critical thinking, reasoning, logic, all these things. And they will be way ahead than all other children because this is not even introduced so early in their life, right? So in this way, they start thinking, in terms of comparison, in terms of they start visualizing, and being Bhagavatam, such a transcendental literature, they actually start feeling very happy. I don't know if when you've done Bhagavatam with your own children or with others, you can see that how step by step they become so blissful and so happy, and so we can create that interest like that. So again, for an older kid, you can go deeper into the purport and, do other things, how Krishna is the reservoir of all relationships, how the ultimate, why Srimad Bhagavatam is the ultimate knowledge, because it takes us to the highest level of pure love of God, and the possessor of this pure love of God is Krishna, and within him is contained everything like that, So you can make a deeper study if that's what you feel like, or you can, leave it this way, like that. So that's the third one. third text, and now I'm going to read to you the fourth text. Now it's going to go a little faster. As you can see, if you if you look at it ahead of time before you do this, then you will see how the first three verses are, first two, at least the first and the third verse for their level is very, very deep. And so naturally, you may have to spend more time. However, I want to let you know that it's not necessary for every verse to be so deep, right? So we go faster. So they've got a lot of philosophy by now. They're ready for the story. And so now the part will come, and that can be done faster, right? Okay, so text 4. Once in a holy place, in the forest of Naimisharanya, great sages, headed by the sage Shaunaka, assembled to perform a great 1,000-year sacrifice for the satisfaction of the Lord and his devotees. Now this is a wonderful verse. We can just touch on it with them, but they need to have a picture. They need to make a picture in their minds that, wow, and you can give them a little background how these sages are in the forest, and they're discussing, and and the reason is they're discussing is because they're very worried about Kali Yuga and the people living in Kali Yuga. So they want to get together and discuss ways how they can help the people of Kali Yuga. And so the one thing that comes through in the pulpit here is compassion of the sages. Why they're doing this, why they're discussing this, why they have Sutta Goswami as their leader and asking him questions, because they have this worried about the people, and they have so much compassion. They want to help. So this leads to so many topics, how devotees are so compassionate, how they want to give this mercy to everyone. It goes on and on, right? But we want to stop. We don't want to remember. We don't want to make it too long. And that holds for every verse that I explained to you, that we can cut it short enough so they can keep going. And then, of course, the next verse, is one day after finishing their morning duties by burning a sacrificial fire and offering a seat of esteem to Srila Sutta Goswami, the great sages made inquiries with great respect about the following matters. Okay. Now, one point that strikes, that children could really benefit from is the morning duties, and that you can easily tap into. And Prabhupada talks about that. Yeah, in this. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. So he may not have talked, but we can see that, the morning duties. Okay, well, does that mean? It means having a little morning program in the morning, right? Because the sages were so carefully doing that, right? Yeah, it's mentioned that they did everything that they were supposed to. So, okay, we will also do that, and we will also do a morning program, even though it may be a very short one, for children who cannot stay that long. Then we just do a short one, but it's so important to do our morning duties. And again, as you read more and more Bhagavatam, you'll get so much more experience. You'll be able to bring out stories from other sections of the Bhagavatam and relate that. For example, in Dhruva's story, when the airplane came to get him, the first thing Dhruva wanted to do is do his morning duties. Like he didn't instantly go and sit on the plane that he could have, because after all, he was going back to Godhead. So what was the need of doing his morning rituals? But no, because he was such a humble devotee, he found it necessary to do what he was supposed to do. In other words, he was such a humble devotee, right? If you know that story and you can connect it, great. And that comes with reading Bhagavatam over the years. You may not remember, but that's okay, because children, even to get that much for them is really good. It's helping them go progress in their faith to Srimad Bhagavatam, and also in their ability to think and reason. Okay, but what I'm saying is that you can do these points will come up, because you remember, oh yeah, this same thing happened with Dhruv Maharaj. He also didn't, he did his morning duties. Right? In this way, they get the point. They become more convinced. Okay, yeah, see, Dhruv Maharaj did this, so it must be something important. I should also do it. And you see children how they're changing. Then they feel more encouraged to do their one round, or do some artik or whatever, at home. And it becomes easier for the parents to encourage them. Why? Because they've heard it in a story, and they've put it in context, and it just, you see the difference. They become more, their brains have, the intelligence has been, fixed and satisfied, and of course there's distractions, but gradually they'll be able to connect, and they really connect immediately. They know, without telling them, you never did your morning program yet, so you missed it and you shouldn't have done it. We don't do that. We just give them the story, and then and then they get the point immediately. They get the point, and then we can say something like, "Oh, let's do a morning program if we haven't done it." Okay, like that. And maybe once in a while you can, give them a reminder, that about Dhruva or something, but don't put them on the defensive. Don't corner them. Otherwise, they will see Bhagavatam like that. Like, okay, whenever we read Bhagavatam, my mother or father always tell me how I'm not doing those things and I'm not good enough. I mean, psychologically, they will start connecting Bhagavatam with their faults, and that's not good. Okay, we always want to make Bhagavatam reading a very positive experience for them, where they can figure it out in terms of their own life. And or if you have to point it out to their practical life, do it in a way which doesn't make them feel cornered. We can say, hey, maybe tomorrow we can do the morning program together or something like that, where you place yourself also in the picture, So in this way, we can feel out. And being a parent or being a teacher, we know where our children are at. And these things become very, very easy, actually. It's not a big problem. So the next one is 7. There's only 20 verses, and now I'm going to go a little faster because the purports are shorter. There's not so much to discuss, but yet, there will be something. Being the eldest learned Vedantist, O Sutta Goswami, you are acquainted with the knowledge of Vyasadeva, who is the incarnation of Godhead, and you also know other sages who are fully versed in all kinds of physical and mental metaphysical knowledge. Next one. And because you are submissive, your spiritual masters have endowed you with bestowing upon a gentle disciple. Therefore, you can tell us that you have scientifically learned from them. So these qualities of the spiritual speaker will be discussed in the next verse also. So I'm going to skip discussing that, the qualification of Sutta Goswami to become their, leader. Okay, so please, therefore, being blessed with many years, explain to us in an easily understandable way what you have ascertained to be the absolute and ultimate good for people in general. So the first question, as you know, sages ask several questions, and one of the first questions is, what is the ultimate good for all people? Okay, so children, we don't want to make it like a school, so we try to avoid, trying to get them to memorize all the questions through this chapter. We try to avoid that, but we could point out, okay, see, this was the sage's first question. Okay, what is the good for all people, right? What is the ultimate good for all people? In other words, what is the best thing for everyone, which is going to benefit everybody, right? So the next one, text 10. O learned one, in this iron age of Kali, men have but short lives. They are quarrelsome, lazy, misguided, unlucky, and above all, very disturbed. I remember when I was doing it with very small children, this chapter, I remember we acted it out. We started acting it out, and they had so much fun because one child behaved as though, started quarreling. One child behaved lazy, and he explained what lazy means because I had each child explain one quality, and they did it through acting it out, and they had a lot of fun. So again, with small children, we can make it so demonstrative and so dramatic, and they love to do that, right? They love to act it out. We can obviously make it into a very vibrant discussion here because it's interesting. The people of this age are quarrelsome, lazy, misguided, unlucky, and above all, always disturbed, right? So again, with older kids, we can discuss each of these things, or collectively also we can discuss, how people, because Prabhupada explains everything here, in the purport where children, what lazy means lazy for spiritual knowledge. They don't want to make the effort to gather spiritual knowledge or to know about Krishna, and and they are always quarreling because of envy, and they are unlucky and all these things. So yeah, and then you can compare it with with devotees, how they don't do these things. They have no inclination, they're not lazy about spiritual life. So you can do a contrast between devotees and people who are materialistic, right? So in this way, kind of make it fun. Like you can even yeah, have them take turns saying something about it, like that. Yeah. And yeah, so people are always disturbed because there's so much anxiety due to their greed and going forward. Okay, text 11. There are many varieties of scriptures, and in all of them, there are many prescribed duties, which can be learned only after many years of study in the various divisions. Therefore, O sage, please select the essence of all these scriptures and explain it for the good of all living beings, that by such instruction their hearts may be fully satisfied. So the next question is essence of all scriptures, and yeah, and so in other words, then you can discuss in this verse the other scriptures. Where do they go? What is their goal? Of some other scriptures, are they really talking about the essence, the pure love of God, which is the essence, or are they talking about how we can improve our life, and do pious activities, and which is more on the material level, because we want Krishna to not to avoid hunger, or we want material things. This they can relate to, right? How people are praying for so many, like a big house or a big, material things, and how that is not so good. It's higher than that, is the to get to want Krishna, to develop love for him. So in this way, we can have a discussion like that. That most of the religions are talking about material level, materialistic, how to become more successful materially. That's why they go into temples and churches, is to pray to God, to uh, and you will remember something. Prabhupada used to talk about communists. How they made the people atheists by telling them, first they starved them, no food, there's no food. They're all starving and hungry. And then they will bring a truck full of bread, and they'll say, now you pray to Krishna, to God, for your material necessities, for your food. See if God comes to your help. And then of course, they all going to say, no, no, we're still hungry. There's no. And it says, okay, now you ask us. And then they obviously they're hungry, and they ask them, and there's a whole truck full of bread, and then they get the bread. And so this way, in this way we can give them some story if we know any. Otherwise, a little discussion, and maybe glance. Sometimes it's easy also to glance through the purports if you hadn't had a chance to read ahead of time. Then just read a few lines, and you get a point. You get a point of discussion, and you can discuss that and move on. At least they got a lot out of it just for you. By you glancing at something at the purport, you still get they still get a lot, right? And of course, if you want to do some artwork or something, is always nice, if you're very creative like that. Okay, so this way, 12, we go on, move on. All blessings upon you, O Sutta Goswami. You know for which purpose the Supreme Personality of Godhead appeared in the womb of Devaki as a son of Vasudeva. Okay. So that's a nice question. O Sutta Goswami, we are eager to learn about the personality of Godhead and its incarnations. Please explain to us those teachings imparted by previous masters, acharyas, for one is uplifted both by speaking them and by hearing them. One thing I forgot to mention is that when they're reading the translation, you cannot expect the children to understand what's saying in the translation. It is the job of the parent or the teacher to explain, not to repeat or to paraphrase that translation. The idea is to just simply say it, or bring just the points, or just bring a point for discussion. In other words, we don't go through that tedious way of going through every translation and trying to make sure that the children understand what's in the translation. The point is that the greater picture is that we need to give them knowledge of Srimad Bhagavatam and how they can relate it as children. Okay. For something like this, we can talk about Krishna and how the sages are really desirous of learning about Krishna and his incarnations. So the topic could be about incarnations, right? And and for older children, we can go deeper on that point, where Prabhupada discusses the qualifications of the speaker and the listener for older children. Living beings who are entangled in the complicated meshes of birth and death can be freed immediately by even unconsciously chanting the holy name of Krishna, which is feared by fear personified. A very nice verse about the holy name of Krishna. And we have enough information where we can talk a little bit about that and give them the inspiration. And then the next one, O Sutta, those great sages who have completely taken shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord can at once sanctify those who come in touch with them, whereas the water of the Ganges can sanctify only after prolonged use. Okay, so this is a very nice analogy, right? That just by taking dip into the Ganga, one can wash away all sinful reactions. But even better than that is to take shelter of the pure devotees, because if we take shelter of them, then automatically we have to do just a moment's association with the pure devotees gives us that result that will only give the result for a long, long time. We would have to continuously bathe in the Ganga to get the same result. And of course, that leads into the discussion of how wonderful the devotees are, how Krishna holds them very close to his heart, and so so that's a very important point that we can have over here is the analogy, discussing the analogy of Ganga with the pure devotees, right? And of course, if you know about how association with pure devotees immediately purifies the heart, whereas dipping into the Ganga is, does not really purify the heart. It simply washes the sinful reactions. But we end up going and sinning again. That's the problem. We keep sinning again and again. So the process of taking shelter of Ganga is a long process versus taking shelter of a pure devotee. How wonderful they are. Yeah. Okay, and then of course there are many examples in the Srimad Bhagavatam, where association, yeah. So remember, we have to bring it down to the level of examples because then they get a chance to speak, right? So in this case, the example is that how a pure devotee can benefit more than any other process of purification, like austerity, charity. And we can think of examples. We can think of many examples of how association with a pure devotee led to immediate purification. Right? Yeah, and we can think of some. They will come up with some example in the Shastra where association of a devotee was so powerful, right? Was so powerful. So then we'll go on to the next. Who is there desiring deliverance from the vices of the age of quarrel, who is not willing to hear the virtuous glories of the Lord? Again, the unfortunate ones who don't surrender to hearing and chanting, right? The unfortunate well, and how powerful it is to hear about the Lord. Next one. His transcendental ambitious and great learned sages like Narada sing of them. Please therefore, speak to us who are eager to hear about the adventures he performs in the various incarnations. So they are eager because his spiritual topic is about Krishna, and so therefore they are very eager. Versus, and then what I did was then I asked the children that how, when you hear, if you take a book from the library, how many times can you read? Right? How many can they say? Well, maybe 2 times, maybe 3 times, and then I said, well, how long have you been reading Krishna stories? And you're still reading them. And she says, well, so many years, and we keep reading it again and again. They get the point. In other words, they get the point that Krishna, something about Krishna, one can never get tired. But something, even the best story, fictional story, ultimately one has to stop. They have to stop. 18. O wise Sutta, please narrate to us the transcendental pastimes of the Supreme Godhead's multi-incarnations. Such auspicious adventures and pastimes of the Lord, the Supreme Controller, are performed by his internal powers. We never tire of hearing the transcendental pastimes of the Lord, who is glorified by hymns and prayers. Those who have developed a taste for transcendental relationships with him relish hearing of his pastimes at every moment. Lord Shri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, along with Balaram, played like a human being, and so masked he performed many superhuman pastimes. Right? In other words, Krishna acts like a human being, but he also, he comes to play the part of a human being, and he also comes sometimes to play the part of the Supreme Lord, right, as a majestic Supreme Lord. But here, how he plays as a human being, he covers. So you explain the meaning of masked, and you explain that how he covers his greatness by becoming like an ordinary person. And then and then you ask them to give examples, and there are so many examples in scriptures, about when Krishna came, he hid his greatness by doing ordinary things in order to give pleasure to the devotees. Of course, Rajalila is all about that. And also, he would do that back and forth with the Pandavas, and this way you can find examples everywhere in this thing. And this becomes very, 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 very exciting for children to be able to give those stories and how Krishna, and it makes them think, see how deep they're going, where they are seeing the deep philosophy that how Krishna, even though he's so great, he's covering it up with his devotees and with his pure devotees. He doesn't want to spoil their fun. He wants to relate with them. And it can lead on and on to deeper, deeper aspects of this relationship with Krishna, with his pure devotees. And you can make it really, really interesting by just using your creativeness, in that way. And of course, Govardhan Leela is there, beautiful example of showing how, even though he was obvious, it was obvious to all his devotees that he was the Supreme Lord. Otherwise, how could a little child pick up a whole mountain? But yet, the Brajvasis, they could not see that, and they were worried about Krishna. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen to Krishna? His little finger will get tired, or what if the hill falls down? It's a great, great example of this, of Krishna, where he's coming as a Supreme Lord, but yet he's covering them all with his Yoga Maya potency to make them feel so happy in that relationship of protecting Krishna. And Mother Yashoda's dealings with Krishna when he was lifting the hill, the cowherds dealing, you know that story of how the cowherds boys were trying to help by putting their sticks and under the hill. Our Mother Yashoda was so worried about Krishna being hungry and getting tired, and so many wonderful leelas they come through. So all that you can relate and make it very interesting for them as far as you can go. last two verses. Knowing well that the age of Kali had already begun, we are assembled here in this holy place to hear at length the transcendental message of Godhead and in this way perform sacrifice. Last one. Oh, last two. There's two more. We think that we have met your goodness by the will of providence, just so that we may accept you as captain of the ship for those who desire to cross the difficult ocean of Kali, which deteriorates all the good qualities of a human being. Yeah. So this is a wonderful verse that was covered in the guidebook. So many, now just in a few minutes, I will show you how this, after this discussion, the guidebook becomes so enjoyable. Of course, you can make the discussion. I'm giving a detailed view of discussion, but you can make it as short as you want to, okay, and move on to the guidebook, right? So here the example is given how, there's a ship and we are all in that ship, and how the captain of the ship is Sutta Goswami, because he's totally capable, and he's giving the message, and the sage ship, and the captain of their ship is Sutta Goswami, and how with the help of the captain of the ship, Sutta Goswami, they are going to cross this material ocean, which is full of suffering and miseries and full of dangers. There's so many sharks in the water, which is the water is the material ocean, and how, but with the help of a pure devotee, one can easily cross this material ocean. And the last one is, since Sri Krishna, the absolute truth, the master of all mystic powers, has departed for his own abode, please tell us to whom religious principles have now gone for shelter. So this is about the glories of Srimad Bhagavatam and how Krishna incarnates as Srimad Bhagavatam in Kali Yuga and is as good as Krishna himself. So that gives us a chance in discussing the glories of Srimad Bhagavatam to them. And we can just barely touch on it, or we can go deep, depending, So I'm going to stop the discussion of the first verse. I'm going to take you to this guidebook, that we have created it with all your help. So many devotees over there in Melbourne helped in that process, of doing activities, creating activities in this book. So if you see the first chapter, if you have the book, or if you don't have the book, you can simply listen. And we the summary of the chapter is given in very, very simple way. You can see how simple we can get to, right? Yeah, because this philosophy is quite dense, so we can make it as simple as we want or as philosophical as we want. The key messages, the themes are very, very nice to review. For as a parent, we may not want to review with them if they are too young, but we may want if they're older, because it helps to highlight these things. I've done that before. The older kids simply mean, between the ages of 10 and 15 or something, not very old, right? But yet they can understand, I quickly sum it up, to them, and they kind of remember these points, or we can skip it. Either way, it's so flexible, whatever we want to do, right? But it helps, especially it helps the parent in trying to remember these things also. And of course, some chapters have character descriptions, which is very, very fun. We can quiz them on that. A fun quiz, again, is not like a school. We don't want to make it like a school. So suppose we are doing Shukadeva Goswami, they may remember because they've done the chapter and they love this part. And they'll remember one characteristic of Shukadeva Goswami, and they will be able to say that. And another child will be able to remember. We give them turns. Okay, one child, one characteristic, and then we go around the group like that, and everybody gets a chance to give one characteristic, that they've just heard in this chapter, right? And this way we go down the main characters of the story of this chapter, and then of course Maharaj Parikshit, and they may remember the characteristics from their past, from what they know already, and this way Sutta Goswami, Shaunaka Rishi, all these people, and we can fill in some of the ones that they skip, right? The sequence of events, some chapters have that, and it kind of kind of takes us to all the things that's happening in this chapter. Okay, and then we have related verses. If you like your children to memorize a few verses, you can encourage them. You can have them, do it. Again, that's parents who are doing this guidebook. They found that just by doing these verses, they are able to, the children end up learning many verses by the time they go through the first canto, and that becomes an incentive, and it's done to give them an incentive because they just read this chapter and they know, so it becomes a little incentive. So okay, and then of course there's questions called multiple choice questions for the younger ones, where there's just like you choose one out of many questions, and it becomes very easy for them to feel they know a lot, and we can go through that. It's a really fun. I even do it over my phone classes in this way, and it's amazing. Even the older kids, they enjoy it because it becomes a challenge for them and it becomes fun. So why not? If you do this, if you want to do it this way. And then the higher thinking questions, of course, is meant to help you in case you cannot think of anything during discussion, to bring those points in. You can use it as a reference, but believe me, those points will come spontaneously. They'll come just by reading them. Your own inspiration will lead you into many points of discussion. But yet, these questions are here for your help, where you can think of questions, discussion questions, if you're stumped, or also you want to use these questions because it brings home some many points, right? So, for example, this one question about, if you were among the sages in the Naimisharanya forest, what questions would you ask Sutta Goswami? Now, this is a very positive thing, right? And they can go back into it and imagine themselves sitting among the sages. What would they ask, right? It's also very challenging because it forces them to think, okay, what is something that I would like to ask? It becomes very personal, and it also becomes challenging. Yeah. Okay, so then we go to the other activities, and we can pick out the activities that obviously it cannot be, some of these activities cannot be done over the phone. So we look at them on your own time and see, okay, well, this sounds like fun. This analogic activity looks really fun. This is something that is doable by me. Again, we don't have to do everything, and the parent can see according to time, place, and circumstance what is the best thing to pick up, right? And then, of course, the artistic activities are always so much fun for them. Making a boat, or or some other, whichever we can see here. And then there's critical thinking activities, where again the whole philosophy, at least the first verse, there's an activity here where the first verse, which is very detailed, can be done in the form of a verse mind map. One can make a mind map, and the central bubble. If you read the directions here, you will be able to understand what it is. We make a central bubble and surrounded by other bubbles, right? So in other words, and what will the central bubble be is the essence. In other words, it's suggested that we put Krishna as the absolute truth in the center, and the bubbles around it would be his qualities. So this way, the attributes that support the main quality, the main attribute of Krishna being the absolute truth, and the other bubbles support that absolute truth. In other words, the children start thinking, okay, well, if Krishna is the absolute truth, then what does that mean? In other words, what are the other qualities that support this one quality? And of course, they've already heard it. So it's like, oh, okay, he's the cause of all causes, or he's independent, or he can put others into illusion, like that, And these things also can come out just from this summary in the book, because, if you don't have time, but I would recommend doing it first from from Prabhupada's Bhagavatam, because then, even if you do a short version of that, you're not going to such details, but it's always nice. The another point is that these verses may be sometimes very, very big, and it's hard for children, younger children, to read it. So we read it for them. And in the case when we are doing this chapter with younger children, we could skip the Srimad Prabhupada's Bhagavatam, doing it from there directly, because it is very detailed, and reading takes a long time because they're still struggling with their reading. So then we can use this guidebook directly. Okay, but I would not recommend that for older children who are very mature, who can read them. I would suggest doing it with them. This is just for younger children. The older children, between the ages of like depending on the children, but 10 to 15, I would recommend going through the directly through Prabhupada's Bhagavatam, even as young as 9 years old, they can handle it. Okay, so again, there's some really, really nice activities here. The verse mind map I just discussed with you, and then we have Srimad Bhagavatam, investigation, critical thinking, which makes a child do some research or think about it. The glories of Srimad Bhagavatam, how and when was it spoken, which personalities glorify it, which scriptures glorify it, what do the scriptures say about Srimad Bhagavatam, and all these questions can be answered in very simple ways, like even a line, right, is good enough, right? And we can do it in the form of a mind map, or we can do it in the form of a leaflet, like that. So many different creative ways we can study this chapter. And this is what the guidebook is meant to help with, right? Activities that can help put everything into actual, in a fun way, and with some visualization, right? With, um, with you know, with things that they can actually do, right? And that can be, these questions can be answered in the form of a leaflet, in the form of a mind map, in the form of verses, or it can be even in the form of artwork, right? If you go through that, you'll see how, some child who loves to draw and do artwork, he can make a flower shape center and put that, uh, write the verses. Okay, so we are almost to the end now, and I'll open it up for questions. So there's other activities here. In this way, you can see there's so many varieties of activities that you can go through and pick out the one that you like and the child may like, right? You can go into very research type of activity, or you can do some fun type of activity like this, right? So depending on the child, right? In this way, and then of course there's introspective activities which helps a child reflect. Remember the process methodology that I went through in the first session, where the child goes through discussion that we already did, but then introspection, reflection. And some of these activities help in that reflection. Of course, we can also do it through, then to be able to do it actually through these activities is really brings home the point, right? So this introspective activity is about how to develop compassion. It's very personal. How can how can the children, as children, develop compassion for one another, right? And for others out there. And that's and then of course for some chapters we have these other activities, required activities, and some language activities. And that also becomes very sometimes fun, right? Okay, so I'm going to stop here. I took a long time. I hope I didn't put all of you to sleep, but this was what I would do, depending on the age group of, of the children. We can frame it accordingly. Okay, so I'm going to stop here for questions. If anybody has any questions.
Thank you very much, Mataji. We received our first question today from Nandini Radhika Mataji.
Yes.
She's asking how many days should the activities from the guidebook can be spread to, as there are quite a few in each chapter. And do we do all the
Mm-hmm.
activities from the guidebook and then move forward to the
Mm-hmm.
next chapter?
No, I would not recommend doing all the activities, and I would not recommend also spending too much time per chapter. But so we'll have to feel it out when we see the children, when they stop enthusiastically doing it, then we know it's time to move on. Okay, so we have to play it by how the children is doing, and how the children are getting tired of it. So we have to be really, really careful about that. For example, the theme of this chapter is pretty much one or two or three, and so when it becomes too monotonous, then we have to move on. Sometimes it you can move on in 1 week. Sometimes if there's many, many exciting activities, you can take 2 weeks. But I would not recommend for children to staying too long in one chapter for too long. Okay. Now, it also depends on how many times a week you're doing that. Obviously, like I'm thinking in terms of every day, right? When I told you that, gave you this answer, it means every day. But if you're doing only once a week, then obviously one chapter will take longer. Okay. So it depends. And you can do, it's up to you, how many times a week you can do with these children. Obviously, as a homeschooling mother, if you're homeschooling, then you can do it every day. For those children who are going to school, there will be less time to get into this. Then if you can do it 3 times a week or once a week, it depends on that. Okay. But the key thing is to understand that that children should not feel drudgery, children should not feel bogged down. It should always remain a really fun thing for them.
Thank you, Mataji. On a similar
Hmm.
note, we have a question from Priyanka Mataji. She's saying, should
Yes,
we read Srimad Bhagavatam, say once a week, or should it be every day? Or because there's a chance if there's a too much of gap, then the chain of
yes.
the continuation of the reading can break. So, what are your takes on this?
Hmm. Obviously, I'm going to recommend reading every day.
Reading? ఏం చెప్పినారు?
Okay, you need to mute yourself, Mataji, whoever children, any child who's making noise, please. Okay, so please, yeah, you can read, you can, obviously, if you do every day, then it's really nice because it keeps up that flow. It keeps up that momentum, going, and the child remains connected, especially in a chapter like this where it's easy to lose it, after some time. But it's okay. If you cannot manage that, then do it less frequently, but don't give up not doing it. That should not be an option, right? Whatever you can fit in. Obviously, you cannot do it for too long because the kids are going to school. So maybe you can reduce the time. You don't have to do it for 1 hour. You could reduce it to half hour or even to 15 minutes. Yet, but don't get into that mode of doing, one chapter, one verse a day. That mode is not, I've found that it doesn't really do well with children, where we are reading one verse and the entire puppet together and trying to get really deep into it. So I think we need to keep moving. See, most of the Bhagavatam is going to have some interesting stories. What I picked out was totally philosophical, right? So therefore, when we keep moving without doing just one verse, then the children are really a lot more interested. They're children, right? They like stories. Obviously, those parts of the Bhagavatam will naturally move on. They want to hear more, and so it'll move on faster. And even this one, we need to move faster if it's too philosophical. But yet, we have to remember that even a chapter like this, we can really make it interesting. We should never think, we should never think that this is the boring part, so children won't like it. It's amazing how much creativity you can use to make it nice and fun for them. And they really appreciate presented in a good way. So, in other words, we should never think that this part of Bhagavatam is not so good. So, yeah, but it's a fact. Children do like stories. Okay, so we can just move faster. Yeah, in these highly philosophical areas of or chapters. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Mataji. We have
Mm-hmm.
Minakshi Mataji asking if it is
Mm-hmm.
okay to do a recap after the chapter, is read with the
Yeah.
clan.
No, no, it becomes too drudgery for children. What we should have after every chapter, what I do, thank you for reminding me on this, because if suppose we cover only half the chapter, I will always leave time for a realizations class after that. Okay. In other words, they must get a chance to speak what they liked in the chapter. Now, if it's a very difficult chapter like this one, then I will say, hey, well, what is it you liked in this chapter? That becomes an easy way of getting them to speak, rather than what did you learn in this chapter, or do you remember, can you sum it up for me? That's very difficult in a chapter like this. Okay, so we don't want to ask them for a summary, or we don't want to recap so much. It's for our own purpose. It's nice to know, but not for the children, right? We just try to tell them, ask them, hey, what did you learn in this chapter? What did you like in this chapter? Whichever way, which makes it easy for them to remember. Sometimes the chapter is so difficult. They've soaked in everything that we are saying because we've made it interesting, but yet when it comes time for them to actually give their realizations, it's really, really hard. So we move on, in other words. But also there will be some point that they will be able to say, and immediately we applaud them and say, wow, that was such a nice point you made. Wow. I even try tricks like, I'm going to write it down so that next time I'll come in handy. And I even made a book, like a copybook, where whenever the child would speak, I would note it down, making them feel how intelligent they are, how wonderful those points are, and I need to use it when I'm doing a class. As a teacher, I say, I'm going to use these points. Is that okay with you? I'm going to use these points for next time I'm teaching with some other kids, like if you're a teacher, right? So I want to remember these points that you just made that I want to use next time. And they get so happy. Wow, my teacher is going to use these points, or my mother is going to use these points for that, right? Or father. So yeah, so I would note it down, and this encourages them. You see how this process has to be very encouraging and applauding, right? It's not a school time. It's not that type of time. Okay. And so, yeah. So don't worry about summing it up or things like that. Don't make it difficult for them. But yet, you can imagine how much they're learning. I mean, they're grappling, they are trying to go through the most difficult things in their life, but in a way that they don't even notice. In other words, Prabhupada said this knowledge is master's and PhD level. So imagine their level, their sophistication, the level of their understanding in terms of such sophisticated knowledge. Okay.
Thank you, Mataji. We
Mm-hmm.
have Chandani Mataji asking if you can kindly point out some differences on discussion in Hiranyakashipu, the king of demons pastime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well, that chapter, we can. Obviously there will be the discussion. It's a story, and it really does become very interesting for them, because it's a story of this atrocious father, who's doing all kinds of nonsense, right? So we can talk about, make it very, very interesting, and make it like, build this scenario for them, how, when he's trying to give orders for the cows to be killed, the trees to be destroyed, and the Vaishnavas to be killed, we can bring it to life by, again, demonstrating it, or creating that understanding that Hiranyakashipu, how big a demon he is, right? How big a demon he is. And also going deep into the philosophy, versus deep into that philosophy, that how such a demon type person, how he's, you know, how those similarities are there. First of all, the similarities between the modern day demons or, you know, the modern day atheists or people who are really, really sinful versus Hiranyakashipu. You know, I really don't want to get into this right now because maybe, you know, this really gets into another area, how to do stories. And unfortunately, we didn't have time, but let's try to focus right now on what we did today, and then maybe later on we can try to deal with another type of example. Okay, and maybe we can have one more follow up after this, where I can really get into the story. You know, how we would predict, how we would explain an actual story, and how who are starting out will be dealing with stories first before they go to Canto 1, Chapter 1. Okay.
Sure, Mataji.
You see, because if I don't have the book right now, it's going to be a little bit tough, you know, to explain the difference between this kind of, you know, discussion versus a story. I would have to have the book and actually do it with you. Okay. Yeah.
We have the next question from Lalita Leela Prakashini Mataji. Um,
Mm-hmm.
she's asking, with respect to maintaining a standard morning program for the kids, could you please
Mm-hmm.
recommend some of the activities that we can practically do as a program at home, given that they are ready to go to school and then parents are also working? So, what's your
Mm-hmm.
opinion to that?
Yeah, so I say that a lot about that in my homeschooling Krishna's children, because I in that book I talk about how the morning program must be done, but it doesn't have to be long for those who are, you know, even for anybody, even those who are homeschooling, depending on the, you know, how much attention we can grab, you know, the attention span, in other words. So it can be very short as like 5 minutes, 10 minutes uh, before they go to rush to school, or we can make it longer for those for homeschoolers who are at home, you know, and for younger people, it has to be fast because the attention span is shorter. For older, it can vary differently like that, depending on how much subjects you want to cover during the school time at home, you know. So it depends on so many factors. But what I want to point out is that it's the main thing is that we must do it every day, and we can make it flexible according to time, place, and circumstance. Okay. But we should not avoid doing a morning program because we must start the day with our children, with the remembering the Lord and His and our spiritual master. Okay.
Thank you, Mataji. Our next question is from Chandravalabi Mataji. She's
Mm-hmm.
asking, when we are reading any story from Bhagavatam, in between
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of philosophy. So whether we should skip
Mm-hmm.
that part or explain that as well, because Mataji
Mm-hmm.
doesn't want that the kids should lose interest in the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you know, in that story of Hiranyakashipu, the king of the demons, there's both. There's the story, the part where Hiranyakashipu is doing all these crazy things, but it's very interesting for an average child. And it's, but then towards after half of the chapter, we hear about Hiranyakashipu preaching to his relatives who are mourning for the death of his brother, uh, and there's so much philosophy there, and you can make it so interesting. No, we should not skip that. Now that philosophy is so different from the what we did today. It's much easier to digest, and it can be presented easier in a very you know, in an easy form, even though it's philosophy. So this is quite different. This is like very different from what Hiranyakashipu speaks about the soul and the body when he's preaching to them. It's really, really interesting, and I go through it quite nicely. I mean, in other words, quite thoroughly. What I meant was, you know, where you help them understand the difference between the body and soul. It can be done just not trying to create your own, you know, theories about that, but just through the puppets, we can discuss these things where Nagash was saying how the body the story of, the Suyagya, right? And the king who's dead, and all the queens are lamenting over his body. How it brings home the point, with the help of Srila Prabhupada's puppet, how the body is still there, but yet, they're thinking he that he's gone. So what is it that moves away? It's the soul. So many nice examples are there, which really brings home the point. I remember doing a devil's advocate with them, in which Prabhupada points out the two sides of those who think that the soul does not exist, and for those who think the soul does exist. Either way, he brings that. So you can do a devil's advocate, but mainly it brings home very strongly the point that we are the spirit soul. And it's done in the form of stories in such a wonderful way. We even went to the extent of discussing about cremation, and they found it so interesting, so interesting. See, there's a part in all of us as human beings who enjoy these type of uh, gory details. We think, oh, we have to save these children from all this heavy stuff. But really, there's the part in all of us which actually want that. We want to hear, and it satisfies that part. I've done so many classes with children where they actually happily get into this because they want to. This becomes really that side, which is gory and which is violent, but yet is the way Srimad Bhagavatam presents it is so wonderful. It doesn't come across like that. They don't become kind of weird or pessimistic. Nothing of that happens, right? When we talked about, how because they were crying over the body, the body could not go for cremation. Then the soul, the husband's soul, was hovering there like a ghost, and they just loved it. Like, wow. They weren't thinking that, oh, this is what's going to happen to me or anything like that, or my parents. No, they kind of understood very logically. Yeah, if the soul is still attached, it's going to hang around. So the best thing is to cremate the body so the soul can feel, okay, I'm gone. Like there's no need to go back into that body. Because I need to move on, and that provides a way. And this is explained so nicely in a short puppet by Srila Prabhupada, right? So we were discussing that philosophy, but it was presented in such a wonderful way that they were fascinated, and but also they were very like, they understood the serious part also, where they understood, okay, well, we're not this body, and so the soul has to move on to the body, to another body, and so we this is a fact of life. And children who grow up with this kind of philosophy, they actually become so peaceful, and they can take things like, okay, we are all here temporarily, and one day I have to die. Even my parents have to die. They can take it in their stride. Actually, it's not a problem for them. And it's such a nice way for them to look at things in life and to become less fearful. Otherwise they become really fearful, and to see the way it is, and actually it does just the opposite. They become really, really positive, about life, instead of creating that negativity that people think it's Bhagavatam is creating, because it's talking so openly about life and death. But children who grow up with this kind of knowledge, they actually develop so much confidence in life, and they also become very look forward to their life here presently and also to the future. So yes, we should cover everything, but again, the time, how much time we spend and everything. For example, that chapter 2 takes a long time, to finish. Not a long time. I mean, for me with a group of children, it would take not a long time. Sorry, I take that back. It takes like maybe two turns, 2 sessions of 1 hour each, maybe three, because it really is very fun chapter, and it's going a little deeper. So see how time will vary according to how much discussion there is and how much you think is so important. Just basic knowledge unless a child understands the basics, it's hard to understand more advanced topics. So we can take time for that. But some chapters, you're going to go a lot faster.
Thank you very much, Mataji. We have a question from Sumeda Mataji.
Mm-hmm.
She wants to
Mm-hmm.
know what is the best age that we can start reading Srimad Bhagavatam translation with the purport with our children.
No, again, we don't read purports with them, please. We don't read purports with them. We only take turns reading translation. If we have time, we read purports ahead of time on our own. We don't read it with the children. It's going to be a drudgery. They'll lose interest. So we are doing only translations. That has to be very, very clear. Many parents make that mistake, and then they wonder why the child is losing interest in Bhagavatam, and then they themselves lose the incentive and they give up. Right? We don't want to do that, because we have to remember these are them the essence of the purpose, not every purpose, just in general, by reading it ourselves and making. Remember, I told how you jot the points on the side, some of the things you would want to discuss, which may be taken from the purpose, right? And then you can throw it for discussion for them. And this way, you're giving the nectar, you're giving them to the children the purpose, but in a way that is very, very relishable, very, very enjoyable. That's what we're trying to do. As parents, as teachers, we're giving them that knowledge from the purpose, but in a way that they can digest. Okay, so that's very important. So I don't know what was the other part of the question. I'm not quite sure, but yeah.
Yeah, I
But
think
I
it's
think
answered, Mataji. So thank you for
okay.
that. I believe we
Mm-hmm.
have a last question for today, which is from
Yes.
Suchitra Priya Mataji. She's asking,
Mm-hmm.
can we read Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita simultaneously, or should we finish Bhagavad Gita and then move on to Srimad Bhagavatam?
Um, it depends. If you want to do Bhagavad Gita simultaneously and the child has the appetite, to, because as you know, is philosophy is, that's why it's called Gita Upanishad, right? Because it's Upashad, oh, Upashad, oh, I can't say that word. Anyway, it's in nature is philosophical, right? It's very philosophical. So therefore, there's only so much a child can digest. And so what you could do is you could read one verse with them every day, and then use the majority of the time in doing Srimad Bhagavatam. Okay, so you could do one verse every day and discuss the purport of that verse, and then use the rest of the time if you want to do Bhagavad Gita. But I would suggest using the majority of the time in Srimad Bhagavatam. Why? Because the philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita is in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Srimad Bhagavat, it's included in the Srimad Bhagavatam, all the philosophy, but it is presented in the form of stories, which becomes so much easier for a child to digest. Okay, so that's the thing. The philosophy of the Gita is in the Bhagavatam, but it's given in a form that they can digest. Okay, so we should not feel bad if we are doing only Srimad Bhagavatam, because there will come a time when they will actually have the appetite to do pure philosophy, which is happening anyway. In the Bhagavatam, they're getting all the philosophy. So anyway, this is my suggestion, and you can always do it according to your situation. Okay.
Mataji, there's one more question. Um,
Okay.
we have this question from Prem Gorangi Mataji. She's
Mm-hmm.
asking how to make prayers interesting, as they come pretty
Mm-hmm.
often in various chapters of Srimad Bhagavatam.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So prayers can be made very interesting by, I think I spoke, or it was in another seminar. Yeah. So what we can do is take, like prayers, we go through it. We don't have to stop in every prayer verse. when we are dealing with prayers. Obviously, we take something that will catch our eye, that we feel like, oh, will be a fun thing to discuss, right? Then you pick that thing and you can discuss. What you could do is, it's very interesting actually, because for example, in the story of Indra, Brahaspati, and Vritasura, where Indra makes a mistake of offending his spiritual master Brahaspati, and he's feeling really bad, and he knows that there's going to be reaction. So he's worried because there is a reaction, because all the demigods, they get defeated right after that by the demons, because of Indra's offense to his spiritual master. And when this comes upon Indra, he's feeling the need to go to help to Brahma. He goes to he goes for help to Brahma, because he feels responsible for the state of affairs of the demigods. And so Brahma, when he goes to Brahma, then Brahma says, okay, well, go to Vishwarupa, this wonderful priest who can give you some mantra, this kavach, Narayan kavach, and that will help you, will keep you all protected, because if you chant this Narayan kavach, then it will protect you, right? And in those prayers, we hear about all different types of, how the demigods are approaching different, features of the Lord, like his weapons and I don't exactly remember. Yeah, different features of the Lord, and they're praying to these weapons. For example, the Sudarshan disc, and praying to the Sudarshan disc to finish, to burn all the demons, right? And protect themselves, right? So in this way, it becomes very exciting, because we can see, this here is a disc, and we can talk about the functions of the disc and what it does, and we can really make it really fun, and we can actually relate it to different stories in the Bhagavatam, where Krishna applied, where he used the disc. It becomes so interesting. So there's always going to be something you will be able to discuss, right? When does he use the disc? You ask them, when did he use the disc against a demon, right? And then, of course, Shishupal comes, and this comes, and that comes, so many different occasions. And this way, they realize, oh, these prayers can be actually a lot of fun. They're not meant to be boring, right? And if you, with the older kids, you can really go deep and talk about, how the prayers of the demigods are more on the material level, on the materialistic level. They're asking Krishna to protect them from the demons. So it's more on that level, because they have material desires, right? And we are all at that level. So so we have material desires, so we go and ask Krishna for help, and how Krishna still helps them, even at that level, even though they're not completely out there, but yet. And then you can compare it with the prayers of Kunti, for example. When they are doing Kunti prayers, then you can remind them, oh, remember Indra prayed like that, but look at Kunti and how she prays, and see, you can see that she's a very pure devotee versus the demigods. It gives you a chance of comparing. When you get around to doing that part, you can compare. So in other words, they get that feeling, that they get that understanding that, wow, prayers also can vary with different devotees and different situations. Okay, so you can think of different. As you do more and more Bhagavatam, you'll be able to see all this and understand all this. And I'm sure all of you have read Bhagavatam on your own also. So these points will come naturally and automatically. But we have to remember that even though many of you may be feeling overwhelmed by all this, I'm just giving you a scenario that be done. But yet, I have to tell you that when I did Bhagavatam with my children, I did not read it before. It was the first time I was doing it with them. So, and then in spite of that, we got some good results, right? So don't get disheartened with this whole process, thinking that, oh, I will have to know so much Shastra in order to do a good job, or I need to have a Bhakti Vaibhav degree before I can do that. No, anybody can do it. There was one devotee who lived across the street from our temple, and she was a really sweet American devotee who had like 5 children, and she never had time for anything, and yet she did Bhagavatam with them, and these kids came out really, really wonderful. So this is for those who really feel like, oh, I can do this. Okay.
Thank you so much, Mataji. Just another question we have is, there are some YouTube videos that are available for homeschooling,
Mhm.
but it was in 2013. Are there any audios or any other files stored in SoundCloud or anywhere where parents or devotees can benefit by listening to it? This is a question asked by Rasarani Priya Mataji.
Well, I know this is being recorded, so why don't we put this up? And you mean in terms of what I have spoken about this?
Yes,
Is that all
Mataji.
you? Yeah, yeah, okay. Yeah, so I would, this is really the first time that this is going to be, recorded and made, and available to parents. So yeah, thank you, Zarna, for recording this, and maybe you can put it up on YouTube for those who really do not have the time to actually hear one. You know.
Certainly, Mataji, we'll certainly do that. And
Mhm.
I know it's been quite long today. The seminar has been quite extended. Just the last question, which is from Sri Radhika Nayaki Mataji. How do we engage a
Mhm.
7-year-old and a 3-year-old in reading Srimad Bhagavatam simultaneously?
Very good question that I never really touched. So yes, now you know what, again, I think I did touch on this, that how maybe in a different way, but how a young child can be kept busy. You know how they get so restless, their bodies have to be engaged in some hands-on things, for them to be quiet and listen. The idea is, why are we keeping them quiet? Not so that somebody else can study. No, we need to keep them quiet so they can hear, right? That's the idea, that even though they are young, they can also benefit, right? So we keep their minds engaged, their bodies engaged, by giving them maybe a coloring book or some kind of soft toy which doesn't make too much noise, and this way they are able to stay there for some time. Now 3-year-old is a little young, they are all over the place, and so to do that with the 3-year-old may be challenging. Okay, so depending on the age gap. Now I have seen and I've tried it before with children and with my own children. A 5-year-old can be engaged in this way. Okay, versus when you have to combine it with an older kid, or even a 4-year-old could be, depending on the nature of the child. But a 3-year-old is kind of stretching too much, where they are just all over the place, right? So you can try it and see your child may be just capable of doing that, and then you could engage the child, or you may be able to stretch it out for half hour or 15 minutes and not longer than that, which is still then is worthwhile. Yeah, you can do that. But generally, I've seen it work for a little bit older kids where they're also hearing, even though you've engaged him, but he's not able to. But at least the older one can hear. Okay, so this way you can try it out, or then otherwise you have to separate the time when you're doing Bhagavatam with your older child. But I would still try it, because I know there's only so much time in the day to do, for you. And where would you put the younger one, right? While you're doing that. So maybe when he's taking a nap or something, right? You can do that. It's well worth it. Yeah.
Thank you, Aruddha Mataji, for an insightful, extremely valuable seminar which demonstrates teaching techniques on how Srimad Bhagavatam, the ripened fruit of all the Vedic literatures, should be read every single day with our children. I believe all the participants of today's workshop will agree that this is the most exciting subject to be taught to our kids. So we really appreciate your time and efforts invested in us today. Thank you so much, Mataji.
Thank you very much, all of you, for your attendance and your um, good listening ability. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Mataji. Thank you. Hare Krishna Mataji.
Hare Krishna Mataji, thank you.
Hare Krishna. Hare
Mataji.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna Mataji.
Krishna
Thank you.
Mataji. Mataji. Krishna Mataji. Hare Krishna Mataji, thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hello. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Huh? Mama, yes, I can. Bye, Mataji.
Looks also కొంచెం similar కొన్ని.
Hare
నువ్వు పాయింట్లు అంటున్నా
Hare Krishna Mataji.
లుక్
Go.
Hare Krishna Mataji.